But right now, I would like to call our former trustee, Halperin, who is also Emmy Award-winning writer and producer, and also AI app developer, and he will introduce our speakers.
Welcome to our presentation this evening, Ross Halperin and David Grann in conversation. A little over 10 years ago, Ross spearheaded the renovation of this library building. He came in and he worked with the trustees and the library and the town, and he made this beautiful memorial to his father, Richard E. Halperin, a reality. So we're very grateful to him for that, and I'm particularly delighted to welcome him back to the library to share with us his latest contribution to the library, his new book, which is called Bear Witness. And I'm also delighted to introduce our second author, David Grann. He's a #1 New York Times best-selling author and an award-winning staff writer on The New Yorker, New York Magazine, New York.
New York.
The New Yorker, yes.
Well, New York.
It's one of those magazines about New York. Among his works are the books The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder, and Killers of the Flower Moon, which was adapted into the movie of the same name. So please welcome our two authors, Ross Halperin and David Grann.
It's so great to be here. It's great to be with Ross and have an opportunity to talk about his remarkable book, ask him some questions. We'll go hard on him. Really put him under the lights. And then I'll leave it open up to some questions and you guys can go really hard on him too. But I want to start out because, most of us hacks in the business, we call ourselves hacks. We kind of follow these traditional paths and go work in small papers and other smaller papers and then small magazines or whatnot. And then eventually, when we're nearing our grave, we write a book. And Ross has defied that path. So I still don't even understand it. Ross reached out to me many years ago. You're studying something at Harvard and then you decide to write a book. Tell me how you even came across the story, how it even began.
Sure. So back in maybe 2015, I was working for a professor of public policy. My wife wanted to raise the mic. Thank you. Better? Okay. She knows what she's doing. No, I was working for this guy named David Kennedy, who is a criminologist who's a professor at John Jay. But he's really more than a professor. He is someone who has figured out how to go into some of the most violent neighborhoods in the United States and reduce violence by working with police, working with prosecutors, working with the community. And in 2017, he had read a book called Ghetto Side. You familiar with that?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And it details the problem of impunity in the United States and how throughout history and still today, a surprisingly low number of murders and non-fatal shootings are solved in this country. And he was very concerned about that and hired me to spend a summer researching the problem. So talking to people, reading professors, journalists, cops, which was sort of my first entree into something that was a pseudo-journalistic experience. And the capstone of that project was a summit in New York City that he arranged with 20 homicide experts. So the New York City chief of detectives was there, someone in the Detroit department was there, a bunch of professors who had expertise related to solving homicides. And the person who ended up being the subject of my book, Kurt Verbeek, was supposed to be there, but because of some of the turmoil happening in Honduras at the time, couldn't make it. So he video conferenced in, gave his spiel in his PowerPoint, which, you know, I think to the average person seeing it, they may not have been terribly impressed, but there was something about it that just totally captivated me. And it was one of those moments where your life changes, and I could almost feel that happening, both because of how what he had done, or what he was saying he had done in Honduras, what that revealed about the impunity problems in the United States, and then also really just him as a person, and like the events of his life, and who he was as a man, and I was fascinated. And you know,
who was he? Tell us a little bit about him, and because he is kind of obviously the igniter of your own fascination that brings you down to this world. He's a central figure in the book, really a remarkable and complex figure. Tell me, you know, because of this meeting, you do something kind of crazy, right? You hop on a plane, you change careers, and decide to write a book. And Godspeed to you for that. So who was he, and why was he, you know, he's a gringo too, which kind of surprised me when I started reading the book. What's he doing in Honduras, and why is he fighting crime of all things?
Sure. So he grew up in suburban Chicago, but he was really part of this culture of the Dutch Midwest. So these are people of Dutch descent who are mostly members of the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Calvinist tradition. And right after he graduated from college, him and his wife, for whatever reason, just decided that they were going to devote their lives to helping the poor. And they originally moved to Costa Rica, eventually found their way to Honduras. And, you know, for the first half of, let's say, their adulthood, they were doing altruism, philanthropy, humanitarianism in a very extreme fashion.
Missionary work or no?
It wasn't explicitly missionary. I mean, they were very religious people, but they weren't in the business of converting others directly. I think they more see, they want to set an example for other people in what they're doing and show what Christians can do. So there definitely is a religious aspect to it. And, you know, the first big thing that they do is, and at this point they have 2 kids, they move to one of the poorest and most violent neighborhoods in Honduras, which is a very radical thing to do. I mean, this is a neighborhood that most Hondurans, let alone gringos, would ever go near inside. And they say, we are gonna move here, we know it's dangerous, but we wanna be living with the people that we are trying to help. And it's really there that Kurt forges this incredible bond, this best friendship with a Honduran, this guy Carlos Hernandez. And their friendship, it's a real friendship, but it's also really based around their work and their desire at first to help the immediate community that they're in, which they both deliberately chose as like, this is the place where if you want to help the poor, you should be. And for a very long time, they're doing all the normal things that humanitarians and missionaries do: education, healthcare, water, land titling, and to a very extreme and impressive level. But as you know, and this is really where the book starts, they get to a point where they realize that all of that can only help so much when there's extreme violence and extreme impunity and lawlessness, because people are getting extorted, people are getting hurt, people are scared, and you can't prosper economically, educationally, etc. under those conditions. So that's the point at which they say, we're going to do something very radical, idiosyncratic, possibly even quixotic, you might argue, which is we are going to start taking on crime directly.
And so they're sitting around, they have these fascinating conversations. What does that mean in terms of taking a concept of saying, okay, we all sit around and say, how can we make the world better? How can we stop crime? But they actually come up with a plan. They come up with a conception, initially it's secret. What is it? I mean, what does that idealism mean in terms of action, and what made it so unorthodox?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I find very interesting about them is they are idealistic in a certain way, and they have these very counterintuitive ideas about Christian theology and about humanitarianism. But then they take those concepts and put it into a real world application. And what they do at the outset of the book is say, we are going to start solving murders. We are going to start solving homicides. There is a gang, it's called the Puchos. They're getting away with murder, all sorts of other crimes. So we are going to finally get them arrested, which the Honduran criminal justice system was not doing for a whole variety of reasons, some of which I would imagine are quite obvious. And I think the key insight they arrive at is when we think of solving murders in popular culture. It's funny that the Sherlock Holmes story you did is jumping into my mind, but we think of the ingenious detective figuring out some deduction, or the CSI lab tech finding something, or the brilliant prosecutor. But what they realized from living in this neighborhood was that in reality, solving murders really boils down to one thing, and it's witnesses. So it's just a person knows what happened, and can you get that person to testify? And in a place like Honduras, it's not only can you get them to testify, but it's also can you keep them safe?
And how, I think it's sometimes hard for us living in these areas, if we haven't traveled to certain areas where civil institutions are so weak, corruption is so widespread, and tell us a little bit about how dangerous was it for them, and for the witnesses, and what steps did they take to try to protect themselves and these witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, extraordinarily dangerous. I think when they set out to do this, if you had asked a person in the know down there, can you get away with this? Is this possible? I think they would have said no. I think they would have said you're going to get the witnesses hurt, you're going to get yourselves hurt, you're going to get your kids hurt. But they managed to figure out a way to keep it quite secret. And one of the big challenges that they faced initially was, how are we going to hire employees to work on something like this? And they found these guys.
Tell us a little, because it's not just like Joe, it's not your average person who says, I'm willing to do this and take on the rest. They find these remarkable figures, very eccentric.
Yeah, I think, they had their existing charity. It's very religious, it's very Christian, everyone is very upstanding and respectful. But when you start wanting to do this type of work, have someone go into this neighborhood, figure out who the gang member is, where he lives, knock on a witness's door in a neighborhood where most people don't even feel comfortable walking around, the type of people who are going to want to do that are not choir boys. And even though that's who they would have wanted to hire. So the one directive that they give when they want to hire this lawyer is, we want to hire a Christian. And that's very important to us, a church-going Christian who shares our values. And lo and behold, in a country where 95+% of the population is a Christian, the only person willing to do this is an atheist, and he's got a ponytail, and he likes heavy metal music, and he's very brash, he's arrogant, he's at times rude, inappropriate, and the private eye they hire is an even more difficult figure. So it's part of the challenge is they end up being very good at this, and uniquely good at it, and they're getting people arrested, and it feels like they're making the neighborhood safer. So Kurt and Carlos are forced to weigh the pro of that with the con of the problems that these types of people present.
And you touched on a little bit, but explain a little bit about You spent many years doing the research. What were Kurt's and Carlos' insights and your own insights into what kind of contributed to this collapse of civil society and these legal institutions in Honduras? I mean, I think I don't know which. Sometimes when I was in Guatemala, I don't know which is the most murderous capital in the world, but it's often cited as certainly one of the most murderous places. What contributed to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of was a perfect storm of a few things. So first of all, there are these two gangs, which I'm sure people have heard of because they're in the news a lot lately, MS-13 and Barrio 18, which were founded actually in Los Angeles in the 1980s. And there's a whole interesting history behind that, but there was a huge deportation effort that happened in the mid to late 90s where people with criminal records were deported. So you had these thousands of gang members from Los Angeles who were sent to Honduras. And this was a weakly policed country where the pre-existing gangs were very weak, and within short order, they had occupied essentially every poor neighborhood, urban neighborhood in the country. And if you were a business there, you were paying extortion to them. If you did something they didn't like, they were gonna hurt you. And the other factor was narco-trafficking. In the 80s, there was a huge counter-narcotics effort to stop cocaine from passing through the Caribbean on boats and planes, which is how it originally got to the United States. And all that did was force the narco-traffickers to shift their routes westward. So the vast majority of cocaine that got to the United States was going from Venezuela, Colombia, and stopping in Honduras, and then going up through Mexico over land. So you have this tiny little country that is very poor, with very weak institutions, and just an absolutely gargantuan amount of criminal activity.
And what were some of the keys to some of their success? I mean, we now have a little bit of a sense of the obstacles and the challenges that they are facing. What do you think from studying them, studying their model, studying their quixotic quest, as someone described it? What were some of the elements to some of the early success? I know you mentioned some statistics in the book. Tell us a little bit about what you thought contributed to that. Was it characterological? Was it something about them in particular? Was it institutional, something about the organization they created? A combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to their success was this process of witness cultivation. And I think that the reason they were successful with that is because they really understood the plight of witnesses. And I think the first thing that you think of is safety, and they did a good job of cleverly keeping people safe. One fascinating turn of the book is when this private eye they hire gets his mother to stitch together a robe, which it looks exactly like a burqa. So they were putting witnesses in burqas and bringing them to cases and to trials, and they were testifying within that. And if it was, a skinnier person, they would put pillows inside. They eventually worked like voice distorters into it, so there was a great ingenuity. And then I think the other turning point was they suffered a tragedy with someone who was collaborating with them, and it was a really heartbreaking moment. And I think at that point they came to realize that there was this psychological and emotional strain that these witnesses were under, because you know the story, these processes could drag on for months or years. You have to keep going to audiences. You're afraid for your life. And they did something quite fascinating, which was they added a third member to the team of essentially homicide investigators, and that person was a psychologist. So the psychologist would provide formal therapy at times, but also really just be an ear and a friend to these witnesses and help people feel more comfortable. And it's pretty shocking. I mean, I think in the book you get a sense of how dangerous these environments are, but over and over again, these random, unheralded, anonymous people stepped up to witness, and they don't get any benefits from it. There's no compensation, it's just risk, but they do it for a variety of reasons, and that leads to this gang being taken down. And I think, the last thing I'll say is they have great success in their neighborhood, but then there's a formal trial where some professors come in from the University of Rio de Janeiro and do a whole study of the project, and they're at that point going into some of the most violent neighborhoods, and within pretty quick turnaround, reducing the average number of homicides per month drastically.
So inevitably, when you confront forces of power, forces of corruption, political entities, narco-traffickers, how do these forces eventually strike back?
Yeah. I think in the first part of the book, it's a lot of success, and it's a lot of getting away with things you wouldn't think you can get away with. And they are very much pushing this almost gospel of courage on their staff. You can be braver than you think you can be. They're pushing it on the witnesses. You can take these risks. People say you can't, but you can. But in the second part of the book, they sort of learn the cost of that. And they, in a place like Honduras where the police are so weak, there tends to be very large private security industries. And, at some level, these are mall cops who are essentially guarding every gas station and store, but they're also very well-armed entities with some scary people who work for them, former soldiers, former cops, and they sometimes are involved in arms trafficking or narco trafficking. And in the second part of the book, they decide to take on that industry and try to impose some semblance of law and order to it. Once again, another thing that no one else will even dare touch. And it feels like there's some initial success, they're getting inroads, and then one of their employees is assassinated. And this really shakes them to their core and forces them to reflect on their philosophy and their approach, and they can't be blasé about safety anymore. And from then on out, that was back in 2006, they have lived under this shell of security. And there have been other threats, but Carlos, who is the more public-facing figure of the duo, spends his days in isolation typically. I mean, he travels in an armored vehicle with security guards because there are so many threats to his life. And it's a challenge because he starts off as this very open-hearted man who's living in the community, delivering construction materials, running the school, and the cost of this is losing that freedom.
I want to open up to questions in a minute, but before I do that, I just want to ask you a little bit about your own process. How did you immerse yourself in this community? How, in terms of your own safety, how did you get people to trust you? Tell us a little bit, peel back the curtain a little bit about the process that went into creating this. Because the reporting, I don't know how many people read the book, the reporting is just really remarkable. It's detailed, it's in depth, it's cinematic. So I'm just curious, even just how you went about that. You had never been to Honduras before you saw this man on the video, so just tell us a little bit about that process of getting trust. How long did you spend in the community? How did you protect yourself?
Yeah, it was just totally starting from scratch. I hadn't been there, I didn't have established connections. So I think the most important thing that I did was when I was down there, and I think I probably did 5 or 6 trips, and some of them were quite long. So the longest one was 3 months, another one was 2.5 months, whatever. But the most important thing was living in Nueva Suyapa. So Kurt, I didn't mention this, but he's a sociologist, and he used to run the study abroad program for Calvin. So when he did that, the students would live in the same neighborhood. So I lived with one of the Honduran families who used to host students. And just being in the neighborhood for an extended period of time, first of all, helped me improve my Spanish, which was crucial because it was just high school level at the beginning. And I did all my own interviews after the first, 2 weeks. And it's very person to person. So you end up talking to someone and maybe they make an introduction. You start figuring out a list of who you want to talk to, reaching out to them, and it gets way easier over time as you start having someone you could send a WhatsApp to and saying, hey, do you know this person, or how could I reach them? But it's a real challenge because, first of all, Nueva Suyapa is still not a place you can just walk around and start asking questions about gangs. So you have to be judicious about who you're talking to. And
Did you bring a fixer with you, a translator, or did you just do it on your own?
No, I mean, the first week or two I was there, I did use a translator, but after that I didn't, and I'm really happy I didn't, because enforcing yourself to deal with like the huge administrative hassle of getting stuff done down there, you learn a lot about the country. And obviously it would have been nice if some of those things were easier, but learning how to do it, I think, was very valuable. And there's a lot of elements to it. I mean, like court records, which is a huge, as you know, very helpful thing when doing this type of work. In Honduras, it's not digitized, and it could be in one of 10 governmental buildings. It's very hard to figure out where it is. Even when you maybe do figure out where it is, it might not be there. And there's an element of risk in all of this stuff because there's certain people who are still there, and I don't necessarily want them to know that I'm going around asking questions about them. So you have to make a decision when you reach out to someone for an interview, or when you walk into a governmental office and say, hey, I want the file on this guy about, sort of if it's okay to do.
And as word got out that you were working on the project, did you get any pushback from anybody?
I wouldn't say pushback. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do this project if ASJ didn't cooperate. And I mean, I wrote it as an independent journalist. I made very clear to them from the outset that they weren't going to have control over it, that I was going to tell the story as I thought it happened. But they sat for so many interviews. They introduced me to so many people. They turned over a trove of emails and documents. So on that side, it was a lot of support. On the other side, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'm sure you know this experience, like especially with touchy subjects, corruption, murder, people who lost their husbands or children. There's some people who never want to talk about that again, and they won't talk to you about it. And there's other people who you reach out to them and you're actually surprised, and they're almost, maybe it's somewhat therapeutic to sit down with someone and talk about this tragedy that happened 10 years ago that you don't really get to talk about anymore. And then I think the other just thing I'll add, and I think to anyone who gets the third part of the book, they'll see this. ASJ, which is the charity at the center of this book, eventually their sort of theater of operations goes from this one neighborhood to the country at large. We are going to make Honduras, the whole country, better. We're going to reform the police, the prosecutors, the judiciary. And they really want to do that in a nonpartisan way. They do not want to pick sides in the politics of what became a very polarized country, but inevitably that happened. So what that means is there's one side of the political spectrum which at this point hates almost this charity, does not like it. So when a gringo journalist is saying, hey, I want to write a book about ASJ, will you talk to me about it? I would say some people on that side of the spectrum wanted nothing to do with it. Not all of them, but some.
Why don't we, I still have more questions, but why don't we open it up, and then I can always come back to mine. Yes, okay.
It seems like a Leviathan task they're undertaking, particularly given the country's proximity to places like Mexico and El Salvador, where our image is either to military dictatorship or total lawlessness. So to undertake something like this, is there faith in either the judicial system, the police, or the military, or some institution where you say, if we go about this, there's some aspect of society I can rely on as an anchor?
Yeah, that's a really poignant question for me, because I think that, sorry, do you mean me or the subjects of the book?
I'm just talking about someone who undertakes, the reform.
Okay, yeah. So the subjects of the book.
So if you say a witness, you have to trust us because this aspect of your politics or military is not going to just be a turncoat.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the really fascinating things about it is in a place like Honduras, or probably some of those other countries that you mentioned, the instinct is to go, these police, they're scum. They're all criminals. They're all terrible. I'm not going near them. But I think something that this program they constructed is built around is the assumption that there are good cops. There are good prosecutors who care, who are trustworthy. And the typical alternative to crime in a country like Honduras, when there's lawlessness, is vigilantism. And people take up arms and they kill criminals. And there's rogue police officers who do that. There are people in the community who take up arms and do that because they don't think these institutions are worth anything. But what this Kurt and Carlos say is we actually think we want to work within the system. So we are going to find cops and prosecutors and judges who will do a good job. And as I think surprising as it is that witnesses will step up and participate in these processes, I think in the book over and over again there's surprises at how people will do a good job. They just need a little support. And sometimes it's a matter of, one of the big issues is the cops down there don't have access to vehicles. So they may want to go arrest a criminal, a gang member, but they don't have access to a car with gas. So the detective and the lawyer working for this organization would say, don't worry, we will rent a car, we will gas it up, and we will take you there. And little things like that, which is a matter of not that much money in sort of our terms, made a huge difference.
Other questions? Yeah.
David touched on this a little bit, but now that the book is out, is there anything for you to be nervous about?
Are you going back to Honduras, in other words, in the next few years?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'd like to see what the reactions are. Some of this stuff that I'm writing about is sort of out in the public domain there, and there's other people who haven't been written about in this way. Some are alive, some are dead, some are maybe dead, which is seems to be a recurring theme in the book. But no, I hope to go back down there. When you do this, spend that much time down there, you build a lot of relationships and a lot of connection to the place. So I'd like to go back.
It's early, but have you had any feedback? Have the subjects read the book yet? What have you heard so far from anyone who's had a chance to read it from down there?
Yeah, you probably know that experience of writing about someone, they don't get to see it.
It's really good when you write about them in the 18th century. We were talking about that earlier. Then the best you may hear is from some great grandchild, and you really know more than they do about their person. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, they actually just put up a website where I recorded some videos of themselves reacting to the book, so anyone who's really interested can check that out.
Who is that?
Kurt and Carlos.
Okay, yes.
I think it's great because, once the book was done, locked, I did let them read it before publication. Look, I think there's certain maybe ways I presented things in certain moments that they would disagree with. The other thing is when you write a book like this, and my editor Gina is here somewhere, and you know, she very wisely advised / forced me to shrink it from a very long book to a more digestible one. So you have to pick and choose what to emphasize, what projects, what people. And I think if they had written the book, they might have chosen some different ones. But all in all, they seem to be happy. It's there. They've been at this for a long time, you know, since this organization was founded in 1998. So I think it's nice for them to have this catalog of what they did. And it's not just people in the 18th century, but even, you know how memories work. I mean, most of the events of this book happened in 2005, 2006, 2007. So their memories of it are quite hazy and high level. So I had to go in and fill all the details. So I think it's been fascinating for them to relive some of it in a more detailed way than they've been remembering it.
Yeah, retelling it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Were you personally threatened?
I wasn't like directly threatened, but the people, when you're writing about crime, gangs, corruption, companies that are behaving really badly, the people who know the most about those things are people who themselves are kind of tangentially involved in that type of thing. So I think the thing that can sometimes be a little bit frightening, obviously there were the people at the charity I spoke to, no worries there, but when you start branching to the people who really have the information that you want, that's when those types of issues feel palpable. And, you know, there were some people that definitely concerned me a little bit, and maybe I met with them and I was like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But nothing, no direct threat or anything like that.
Yeah.
So why didn't the good guys and the bad guys at some point just wipe out the good guys?
Well, so, I mean, the first group they go against is this gang. It's called the Puchos. They didn't know who was behind their downfall and their problems. So that aspect of the work was totally clandestine. Not anymore. I guess now that there's a book, but they didn't know about it, is the short answer. But later on, when they take on this company, at that point, someone does get hurt in their organization. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, because in the third part of the book, they take on the police force. And at the time, this is a country, it's the highest homicide rate in the world. It's probably the most criminally active police force in the world. And they say, we are going to try to reform your institution. We are going to fire the cops who are involved in bad stuff. And they take that on. And they're given a level of political power to do that. And they take the leadership in this huge purge, and they're firing cops who are allegedly involved in narco trafficking and all sorts of things. And why are they able to get away with that? I mean, I don't know the answer. I think one thing they're really smart about, especially at that level, is alliances. So they're not going it alone. They're allying with the evangelical church, with the biggest university in the country. So they're presenting as sort of a group of people doing this, a coalition. But I would say they're the driving force behind it.
Did you ever see the movie Traffic?
A long time ago. Yeah.
I'm looking this way. Is there anyone on this side? Yeah, over there.
Following up on the film question, when this becomes a movie, who's going to play you?
Well, I'm not in the book. It's totally third person, so I will not be appearing. I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. I can't answer that. I'll just.
Making of the book.
Okay, I can be in the DVD extras.
Ross, I'm sure I speak for everyone in the room. This is an incredible accomplishment, and we are so thrilled and proud.
I'm related to her.
I do have a question.
Okay.
The question is,
Now she's just softening you up. Now it's the hardest question you got.
now that the book is done, do you want to do another?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy doing this work, and I think I really learned how to do it. I did not know how to do the reporting, how to do the writing, how to do the organization of the huge amount of materials you get. So I sort of developed all of these skills and know-how, and it would be kind of a shame not to do it again. But I'd actually be interested to hear what David would say about this. But I think it's probably really hard to find a subject that you are passionate enough about to spend this much time on and effort. It's really hard to do. And I never lost interest. I mean, I struggled to get the information I needed to make it the drafts better, but I never lost interest in discovering and learning. So you have to find something that inspires that. So we'll see.
Let's go to this side. Yes.
You said the witnesses bore witness for a variety of reasons, but you didn't name any of them. What is the essence of why those people? What do you imagine it to be?
So sometimes it's personal. Sometimes your brother was killed by this gang, and you don't want to accept that, and you're willing to take the risk to, I don't want to say avenge, but to administer justice, because without it, maybe there's an emptiness, maybe there's a sadness which will never be repaired. And then I think the other factor is people hated this gang. They hated them. They were mostly kids, teenagers, very young men, and they were making people's lives miserable. So
I hear hate and anger. Anything on the other side of the coin?
yeah, I mean, I think it's people who live in these neighborhoods want there to be safety and justice, and I think that's something people are willing to take a risk for and put their lives on the line for. We're fortunate here to not have to live in a place like that, but people are willing. It's essentially like a civic contribution to your community to do this, and people, even though this is a very, as I said, marginalized, often besmirched community, people are very proud of it. They're very proud to be from there. They love it there, and they don't like that this problem was attached to it.
Is that why you did this?
I don't really know. Oh wow. From far away, just a second here.
Did you feel anything in common with the witnesses?
I was amazed by them, like truly blown away. Like, these people are real life superheroes. Like, I cannot believe that you did this. I mean, some of the people in this book are so violent. There's a guy who, he fashions himself as a vigilante out for justice, but he clearly dislikes murdering teenager boys and does it in the most horrible fashion. And if someone is going to witness against him, he will kill you. And he is not above showing up at a wake and threaten to kill anyone who talks about him. there were people who knew that about this person and still stepped up and testified. And yeah, you're blown away that anyone would do that.
How are things there today? Has it changed? How effective were these guys and what they accomplished, and can you win at the end?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concrete accomplishments you can point to. I think the neighborhood where they started is less violent, but it's still violent, and there's still gang activity there. They do a lot of things at the country level. They improved the police force. They fired, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 cops, changed the way the academy worked. They exposed corruption in the healthcare system. Kids are supposed to go to school, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, for 180 days a year or something, and they were only going for 10 days a year. And they exposed that. There were a lot of teachers who weren't even showing up. They got rid of those teachers. And there are all these nice accomplishments, but it's still a very poor country, a corrupt country, where these gangs have a presence. So it can probably be really frustrating to work in an environment like that, where it's not yippee, happy ending, everything is great now.
There are people coming up the ranks, are to take the mantle, continue with it,
You mean in their organization?
organization, or here in the country.
I mean, it's a pretty impressive operation at this point. I mean, they probably have 130 employees, I would guess, at this point, headquarters. That there's, they're the two leaders, co-heads, but then there's a whole group of amazing people underneath them. But yeah, it's interesting to think what the future might hold if they retired or something. But I don't think that's going to happen soon.
The money comes
That's what I wanted to, what's the
to
economy?
support this group. How do they build it and continue to fund it? And
Yeah, I mean,
everybody just volunteering.
it's fundraising. It's most of it is individuals. They have a lot of Kurt especially spends time going to churches in the U.S. and raising money. They have donors. The hub of that is Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is sort of part of this Dutch Midwest area. They do fundraisers there, but it's hard. I mean, I had my own taste of fundraising with this library, and it's a very difficult thing to do. But they've gotten very good at telling their story in a way that appeals to donors. And one other thing I'll mention, which I think is a little bit interesting given the current news, is they used to, maybe in like 2014, 15, 16, they started getting a lot of money from the American government. And that's when the organization really went from being this kind of small-time ragtag operation to a super impressive big one. And when Trump announced the cut of aid in 2019, this was like an existential crisis for them, because 50% of their funding or so is coming from the US government, and they were going to lose that in the drop of a hat. They were able to replace that with private money, and after that happened, they said, we're not going to be overexposed to US government funding. So now it's a tiny sliver.
Want to do a couple more questions? You okay? And then you can hit him up when he signs his book. Yeah, back. Please, you.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is on in the modern day investigative journalism. David had mentioned, working at small paper, small journal, small everything, and you mentioned your epiphany of how you came into this, you found a story, you jumped in. But from your perspective, of your generation, how do you perceive investigative journalism will be, how will people of your era find the resources for investigative journalism?
That's all yours.
No, I mean, it's sad because I would like to continue doing this work. There's a lot of other people like me who would like to be doing this work. I think it's super important for the world for people to find stories and write about them, and everything from newspapers to books to documentaries and stuff. But there's less and less places where you can do that. Less magazines, less newspapers. Yeah, but I think books is a really interesting place to try to do it, and I was very fortunate to find a publisher that was willing to support this project. Actually, the person who did that is directly behind you, Gina. She's my editor, and we shot this book. It wasn't of interest to anyone else, and she and Liv Wright, the publisher, supported this, and but I don't have a good answer.
No, I think it's all for all of everybody in the room to kind of rise up and say, hey, we need more. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just blown away that you did this. It sounds like a lot of it was by the seat of your pants, baptism by fire approach. Did you ever, in your the 3-month stay there, wake up in the middle of the night and say, I grew up in Westchester. Most of my friends are in private. What am I doing? How did I get here? What was it about you that made you act on this and do such a deep dive into this kind of dangerous territory? Was it the parenting you had?
Of course it was.
Paging Freud.
Did you ever have any self-doubt as you lay there alone at night with your that you were the person to do this?
Well, one thing I think would actually maybe help explain that a little bit, so I don't sound totally crazy, is I had an amazing mentor. So I mentioned this book called Ghetto Side earlier. So this was an amazing book about impunity and policing and crime in the US, and it was a book I really admired. And the woman who wrote that book, Jill Laovi, was the person who originally encouraged me to do this, and was with me every step of the way as a...
You reached out to her.
Yes. I mean, as part of that initial impunity research project, I met her, and then when I found this story, funny enough, I sent it to her, and I said, I would love to write this with you, or maybe you should write it, or if not, maybe I should try to get someone to let me write it. And she said, do it. And she said, go to Honduras. She's like, you just record the interviews, take a lot of notes. It's not that hard. So I think she kind of undersold how hard it was and kind of kicked me down this rabbit hole. But to her credit, she was an amazing friend and resource throughout this whole process. If I had any question or worry or concern, I would just call her and she would help. And over the course of many years, so I had that support. And I think it's just back to the passion and the interest in the people and the story. And I'll admit, it took me a while to get an agent, to get a publisher on board, and there was a lot of rejections between starting and that. And I think there's an element when a lot of people tell you, you can't do this, you're not a good enough writer, this is not an interesting enough story, that you kind of want to prove you could do it.
And I think you said you also wrote sort of cold call David as well. So I think what I'm getting at is the interior. You have moxie, chutzpah. It starts with that, an energy where you're not afraid to reach out.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what the reporting is. I mean, you're doing that every day when you're down there. Most people are ignoring you, then they'll say, oh yeah, sure, I'll meet you here, and they don't show up, and then it's just over and over and over and over again.
He's got it. He got me out of my house. I don't leave my house. I don't leave my little den of research anymore. He got me out. I think it's a good place to end because I want to end on a hopeful note. And the book is a trial. You should all get it. He will sign it. You can ask him more questions when you see him. But it is about the power of truth and reporting. There's a great need for it. One of the things I have learned in reading the book is you also deal with what happens in societies where that truth is easy to erase. There aren't institutions to support it. So the fact that you have done this book and you have shined a light, you've filled in a piece of history, we're all grateful to you. So thank you.